This is an Amper Sounds production.
There is a leadership election coming, and the outcome of that, which will determine whether I stay or go. I think that's but the internal culture of the party and its connection to material reality is seriously in question at the minute.
Yeah. Do you prefer trade union politics then?
Well, yeah, because they're rooted in something real. Like trade unionism is about pay and terms and conditions and people's ability to pay their gas bill and their dignity at work, their right to have a say in the capital they create. Whereas Labour Party is it's very often obsessed with actually the things of balance sheets and profits and losses and, the personality politics of individuals. It's not rooted in... The trade unions were always what rooted the Labour Party in something very real. And now their influence, partially through their own behaviours, but also through the culture of the Labour Party, has waned. The party itself has become more and more facile, I think.
Yeah. There's no reason for it to be.
No.
When you're working as a trade unionist for equity, who are you negotiating against? When you negotiate things, who you sitting opposite?
So we're a strange union in lots of ways, but one of the strangest but most pleasant features is that we have what we call sectoral collective bargaining. Okay. And it's a big demand of the left and of serious trade unions of the Labour Party to bring it back everywhere in the economy. And what sectoral collective bargaining means is multiple employers represented through employers' associations who negotiate direct with us. So at the minute, I'm going to Los Angeles next week to go and talk to Netflix and Apple and Amazon and Disney and Paramount and whoever else. But they're represented in this country, or they all use the same agreement in this country as the bedrock, which is negotiated. It's the same agreement that if you're working on a small independent British film or if you're working on a Netflix production, it's the same underlying terms. Same on the West End, same in commercial touring, same in subsidised theatre. Multiple employers bound together by a single agreement. So the people the union negotiates with are the representatives of the producers, normally elected from within their membership. So that's the bedrock of how we function as a union, and it's the only way to deal with the gig economy. It's the only way to deal with the fractured economy, and it's a very successful way of unionising young workers, marginalised workers. But there are other barriers that prevent equity being as industrially successful as we
can
could
talk
be.
about some of that. We can talk about some of that. What are you going to Los Angeles to get from Netflix, Disney? What is it you're trying to achieve?
So there are two big areas of contention in our negotiations in TV and film at the minute. One is royalties, one is AI. And AI is the biggest sticking point for members because it doesn't just rob them of pay, but it robs them of the dignity of the opportunity of a job. It assaults something more ethereal than just your ability to pay your bills, but it assaults that as well. What the bosses have offered us is actually a deal that's better than what SAG-AFTRA agreed after 100 and whatever days of strike action in 2023. But SAG-AFTRA are about to go into negotiations themselves. They've just started. So we're going over in part to sit in those SAG-AFTRA negotiations like we did in 2023, watch where the big American players are going with the American unions who still operate closed shops, who have lots of industrial tools at their disposal that we don't have, but also to try and move the logjam that we've had in our negotiations. We've been negotiating for almost 2 years now for a new agreement. We knew it would be a long time because it's a big deal. We're trying to shift a lot of stuff. But it's fair to say that the big blockers on getting a very good deal on AI are those big American streamers.
Great.
So that's who we're talking to, and that's what it's about.
And with that, you're watching Enough About Me. We're here with General Secretary of the Equity Union, Paul Fleming.
Hello.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thanks for coming down.
That's all right. No, thank you for having me.
And your dog is there.
A little Stanley.
In case you, I don't know if they'll catch you on the camera, but
he'll jump up at some point or another.
He's there. So you're General Secretary of Equity. What is Equity for those who don't know?
So Equity famously represents actors. So 60% of our members are actors. The second largest group are what we call, slightly quaintly, variety performers. So they're individual acts as known, comedians, drag acts, storytellers, contortionists, pole dancers, and so So the second largest group of our members. And then the rest are other artists whose work you see on stage. That could be designers, directors, stage management, dancers, choreographers, that wide breadth of basically the performers and entertainers that you see, the creative workers.
Sure. And you've been General Secretary since 2020.
Since 2020.
How's that?
It's been great. I mean, I was elected in the middle of the pandemic, where we were losing about 1,000 members a month. 70% of our members didn't get access to furlough or the self-employed equivalent of furlough because their wages are so precarious and low. And it was a pretty scary, grim time. And actually, I spent the first really 2.5 years of my term having planned to stand in 2019, wanted to build a strong industrial union that can kind of take on the bosses directly at work with barely any workplaces to do that in, and an industry that genuinely was in an absolute tipping point. And we went through moments of producers threatening to tear up our agreements, of moments of us doing deals that weren't necessarily very popular with our members to keep productions running, and all of that with the age of streaming changing in the background, the way in which royalties are calculated fundamentally altering, the way in which, frankly, people's appetite for theatre, the collapse in local government funding, an erosion of venues from, pubs and clubs through to regional theatres. So the first 2 or 3 years was really, really hairy. So we spent that time, I guess, doing a lot of internal changes in the union. Trying to make it more connected to the grassroots of our membership, trying to marry it more to our members who are in work and seeking work, which has led to the membership growing, led to our density growing. That's the number of members in a particular workplace. And the kind of beginning of the product of that was in 2023. We had a great campaign on the West End called Stand Up for 17, where we claimed for a 17% pay rise. We in the end got a minimum 16.7% rise, which is a compromise you can live with. In the end, because the last year was inflation linked, it was over 22% over 3 years. So it was a good deal. But that kind of showed the potential of, if you're an industrially focused campaigning union in the position that we're in, you can genuinely make a difference in an industry that's been precarious gig workers since the days of Shakespeare.
I mean, and you won again last year, General Secretary. You ran again. So you're doing something right, or something that the members were enjoying. What did you bring to equity that was missing before 2020? Then was it a different union? Have you changed how? Because I've heard you described as a more kind of I don't know if it's combative, but a more kind of radical fighting union leader than the industry is used to. Is that a good characterization, or in the industry in the UK at least?
I think it's fair to say. I mean, trades unions are collectives, right? And I think sometimes there is a tendency on the left in general to try and find individuals that, because we want good stories. The truth is, we have a council, that's our national executive, presidents, vice presidents who've radically changed what they want the union to do. And I think that, frankly, our members really have their backs against the wall in a way that they haven't ever since the union was formed in 1930. So part of that is having me as, and I make no bones about it, and I have no shame about it, as a career bureaucrat. I've worked at Equity for 15 years and 15 days today, not that I'm counting. But I have been able to bring... my role is to make sure the union runs in the ways that members in their workplaces want it to run. And there are things the union hasn't done before, not because we were necessarily scared, but because the moment wasn't right. Taking on Spotlight, the huge casting directory. Yeah. We currently have a case going to the Court of Appeal over the status of that. A big campaign on the West End, threatening industrial action in TV and film over AI. Those are things that the members want. This is very little to do with me. My role in that is to manage, function, express that aspiration of our members to have a better and more decent industry.
It's quite. I was following that fight, that battle with Spotlight. It's quite interesting because there was a lot of stuff being put out by pro Spotlight people about how much they love Spotlight, but like I've never known an actor in my entire life who has a good thing to say about Spotlight. It's like a prison that you have to be in, and like they still get this like, oh, Judi Dench uses Spotlight, darling. And it's kind of like Judi Dench does not use Spotlight for jobs, but she might be on it, and they put the prices up every year, like, and it's that you have to do it. It's like a trap, and some actors go years never making that money back that they're paying. You know what I mean? Like hundreds of pounds a year or whatever. And then it's like one of those things where, if you can afford to pay all of it at once, you get a little bit of a discount. But if you can't afford it, you actually end up paying more because it's now a monthly thing, whatever. So it is quite interesting how they, what made, tell me about that fight. What's going on with that fight?
So for people who don't necessarily know what it is, Spotlight, 95% of productions in the UK, thereabouts, use Spotlight to cast some of the parts in the production. It is a requirement of most agents for artists to use it. It has a monopoly, but by any definition, it has a monopoly on performing artists advertising their skills. Our view is that makes them an agency. And that might sound a bit weird because people think of the theatrical agent who finds them a job or whatever. Then we might think of office angels or whoever who get you your temping work and that kind of stuff. Obviously, agencies are a very broad range of things. The definition in law of an agency is an organisation which, by the provision of information or otherwise, seeks to match work seekers with work or those seeking work seekers with those seeking work. That's a very low-level definition, and it has to be in order to ensure that people aren't exploited. And this is very old legislation, it goes back to the 1970s. That legislation has a specific schedule that opts our industry, almost uniquely, out of a series of provisions. And one of the provisions it opts us out of is it's illegal in most industries for an agency to charge an upfront fee. You have to pay out your wages. And that makes absolute sense because you've got an agency, they're a part of the economy, they have to pay their bills. But you don't charge people who don't get work. By very definition, the people who have work to offer, have money. The people who are seeking work do not. That's why they're seeking work. So you pay office angels or your agent or whatever out of a percentage of your wages. Or there are other platforms or whatever that are paid for by the person who's seeking to recruit. They post adverts in newspapers at their expense, all that kind of stuff. So, but our industry's opted out of that. It says you can charge an upfront fee for work seeking, but the upfront fee can be no more than the cost of inclusion in the directory and the distribution of the directory. So you're supposed to pay your share of Spotlight's costs in putting it together. They should not, in layman's terms, be making a profit. They can make a profit in other ways. They can make a profit from their audition suites. They can make a profit from other services. They could do whatever. And as long as Spotlight is offering an advertising service for your labour and other services related to work seeking, then their charges have to be capped. It's our belief that the government should change that law and that the regulation should be removed. The Labour government looked at removing them in 2009 and tightening it up. And we hope that the Labour government in their upcoming review of agency regulations will do so again. Will actually kind of progress that. However, Spotlight is of the contention that they're not an agency at all. We lost a case in the High Court last year.
What do they say they are?
They say that they are a marketing platform, which begs the question, marketing to whom? Nobody is on Spotlight to market themselves to the world at large, you're not using it as an alternative dating profile, which is one of the more hilarious comparisons that the judge in the original case makes in her judgment. She says, this is just like matching people for any purposes. And if you think about Spotlight compared to, let's say, IMDb, we use IMDb to find people who are owed royalties. Audiences might use IMDb to find out who was that character that they liked. Casting directors might use it to cast somebody. But you don't have to pay for inclusion in it. In fact, lots of problems with IMDb come from the fact that artists don't edit and control their profiles on them. But fundamentally, it's got a multitude of purposes. What other purpose is there for Spotlight? Spotlight's sole purpose is for work seekers to find work and for those offering work to find work seekers through the provision of information. It is an agency, not a software as service, a marketing platform, all these sort of jargony language that's trying to dance around the fact that they are the gatekeepers to work. And charging somebody before they have found work is a tax on hope. And our industry runs on the fumes of people's hope. And that's where Spotlight manages to make some quite extraordinary levels of profit from their monopoly position through people who are desperate to get work in their chosen industry, where there is an undersupply of jobs.
So where are you at now with the case? What is happening with the appeal?
So the appeal will be in the autumn, and there'll be a sort of an announcement coming soon about that. We want to do a bit more action in members' workplaces. We have never, in all my time at Equity, I have never known something that we've done be more popular. 75% of members open the email to find out about the loss. And we receive more replies to that generic email than we have on any other subject. And those replies were overwhelmingly positive. And that is an extraordinary turnaround from a union that sometimes legitimately, sometimes not, has been blamed every time that things have not gone as well as they could have gone. People seeing the union standing up and fighting. The liberation comes in the struggle. It doesn't come in necessarily in the victory. And the fact that we are taking on what is now a large American venture capital-owned entity that seeks to make work out of unemployed artists' hope of getting work is something that is understandably not just popular, but quite a righteous struggle that people want to get involved in, and they like the union sticking up for them in that way.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, of all the performers I know, like no one likes Spotlight. No one's happy for Spotlight. I think there was like a moment in like third year of drama school where I was like, oh, we're going on Spotlight. And then like you just work out what it is, Okay. So when did you say you were a lifelong bureaucrat or whatever. Or whatever.
Or whatever.
Or whatever. But you joined Equity in 2011. Why did you join Equity? Was it just a job?
It was just a job. I worked for the Steelworkers Union before I worked at Equity, and they were going through. I did 901 redundancy appeals at Scunthorpe Steelworks in about 18 months, and as you're losing members, the union consequently starts to lose staff. So we were starting to go through a redundancy process at the union I used to work for. So I started looking for jobs, and I thought I don't really want to live in London, but this seems quite interesting. And so came down and started doing that in 2011, which I thought would be for a very short period of time, but it was not.
So you're like a full-time trade unionist. Is it unusual to have a trade unionist not from the industry?
In our union, no. So we have never had, we have had a general secretary once who was an actor. That was during the war, and he hated it so much he resigned on VE Day. Right, he was like, I have had enough of this. And our first general secretary, like absolute legend, was a guy called Alfred Wall, who was a self-taught print worker who grew up in sort of rural poverty in Shropshire, moved to Manchester in the late 19th century, learned to read and write, became quite an intellectual really, moved to London, became a Communist Party councillor in Wandsworth, was the chair of the London Trades Council 100 years ago during the General Strike, the largest socialist organisation in the world at the time. And Laurence Olivier, who was not by any stretch of the imagination the most progressive character around, when the union was being formed in 1929, was like, who are we going to get to help us with this? And they were like, we need a bureaucrat, and we need somebody who is, well, frankly, a communist. And so they went, Dame May Whitty and then Sir, that latterly Lord Olivier, went to go and find Alfred Wall, this mild-mannered, round-spectacled communist in Wandsworth, to become the first general secretary. He was replaced by a town planner. He was replaced by I can't remember who replaced him. But yeah, my predecessor worked for the union her whole working life. Her predecessor worked there for a very long time. Previously worked for the Labour Party and other unions. Predecessor again. We as a union have a culture of a bureaucracy that are bureaucrats, and it means that there's a. And one of the reasons why that is it's not just that our members aren't particularly interested in becoming trade union officials. They are. There are other unions that have a similar culture. The BMA, for instance, doctors tend to want to be doctors, not become trade union officials. But it's also because our members, they're more likely to make more money from waiting tables or being a courier or teaching or whatever than they are from their chosen profession. And so consequently, the amount of time you can reasonably expect members to involve themselves in organising, bargaining, negotiating is very different. So their kind of relationship to the structures of the union is very different. Our union is more democratic, I would say, than most others. It has more layers of democracy, which could sometimes be difficult to navigate. But that's as an antidote to that.
In what senses? In like local, regional areas? Like how is it more democratic?
So all of our industrial negotiations are run by committees that are elected directly from the membership, not via a conference or via some sort of third-party route or, subcommittees of the national executive. They're directly elected by the membership. Every member has a branch to attend. Each of those branches can pass policy, can ask the council to pass policy every month. Our council's a council of 35, which most unions of our size, when we have 50,000 members, most unions of our size would have a council of 2/3 that size, if not smaller. So there's a level of and our president is powerful compared to the presidents for the unions. They're not just there to chair council meetings. They are the kind of my oppo, if you like. They're the voice of the member governing the union. I'm the voice of the bureaucrats managing the union, which is actually, in our context, a very healthy one. It can lead to some very unhealthy behaviours, and historically, at points, it has done.
Like what?
Well, we had a closed shop until 1988, which meant that you had to have an equity card in order to work. Now, when the bureaucrats in control of those equity cards, it can lead to some rather unsavoury behaviours on the parts of those bureaucrats. In some instances, not all. I know I'm in touch with lots of colleagues who worked at the union at the time, and who were amazing trades unionists, but there were others who were lazy. You don't need consent from your members if you want to. If the union is controlling whether you work or not, you don't need to ballot people on a pay rise. You just can agree the pay rise, and if people don't like it, there's nothing they can do. They can't even walk and leave the union, let alone stand up and fight with it.
Okay, that's so interesting, right? Because I often think about the actors' equity in America and even SAG, right? Which is a closed shop, right? And I get that it's different in America. So they get their healthcare benefits through their union membership and all things like that. But they're a closed shop. And in many ways, you can't, it protects them in different ways. For example, I don't know if this is through the American laws or through equity stuff. If the character is American, you can't bring someone from another country to play that part, things like that. Whereas you can over here and stuff like that. So would you say you lean on the side of closed shop being not a good thing?
I think the first thing about the closed shop is it's a bit like Dumbo's feather. In this country, it certainly was. Okay. We believed, we had a closed shop from 1935 until 1988. We believed that was the only way you could organise people. And actually, if you look at the West End, minimum rates of pay on the West End in 1981 were £100 a week. Adjust that for inflation, that's about £400 a week now. A minimum rate on the West End, even in the smallest category theatre, is about £850. In the largest category of theatre, it's sort of licking on £1,000 a week now. So we've done significantly better on pay, and we've been more radical on pay, not just under my tenure, but under my predecessor's tenure, than we were capable of being, or we desired being under the closed shop. And our density at the minute, so that's the percentage of union members in a workplace, the West End tonight, 80% of people on stage are a member. That compares to, in the private sector as a whole, 10% of people are union members. So we don't need a closed shop. We don't need to be empowered to have a closed shop. Frankly, we could have a closed shop by choice tomorrow. If you can convince everybody to join, you've got a closed shop. And that, I think, makes the union work harder. It means that very vulnerable people aren't protected. It means that, particularly on the fringe and when you're starting out, and the fear of blacklisting and so on, is very real for members, particularly at that lower paid end, that more precarious end, that entry end very often for people. But I would say that it's not as important as people sometimes think. What is significantly more important is the ability of the American unions to go on strike entirely sectorally, to take forms of secondary action that are not legal over here. If people look to those SAG-AFTRA strikes, their national executive met. They turned the deal down. They told everybody to down tools at midnight the next day. They were out until they were satisfied. Now, in this country, we would have to ballot at the home address by post all of our members who were working Not in general, not their representatives on the council, but the members who are working at any one time, relying on data provided by the bosses. We would have to choose in advance of that vote as to whether the pool would be the whole industry or would be one particular production. Then we would have to achieve a percentage turnout, normally over 40%, of which we would have to get more than 50% of people voting yes. Then we'd have to give the bosses 2 weeks' notice of exactly what action we were going to take, and then we'd have to renew that mandate 6 months after. That's a much bigger barrier to being an effective union, to whether you have a closed shop or not. And sometimes equity has tried to dodge, and we did, certainly under the early years of Thatcher, we tried to dodge a lot of these structural questions about trade union freedom. And that is a much bigger impediment. We have much more severe labour laws in the United Kingdom than they have in the state of New York or the state of California, where the two American unions operate primarily.
So they're like state laws that they work under.
They are, yeah. So when I go to America, and I try to, we do a bit of an exchange about what the differences are. SAG-AFTRA members want to know why we can't do certain things. We want to know why they can't do certain things. We are, you might have heard this stuff bounded around, like a right to work state.
Yeah.
We have the right to not be a member of the union. You have the right to break a strike. You have the right to state protection to do those things.
That's essentially what Thatcher brought over here, right?
Exactly. Tony Blair in 1997 said, we have the most restrictive labour laws in the Western world. And he said that with pride as a selling point in 1997. And things have got worse since then. There is no international index of trade union freedom that ranks the UK very highly amongst developed nations. And obviously in Europe, we're a massive outlier. But comparing us to, as I say, the state of New York, the state of California, we look like somewhere in the United States as operating a right-to-work model.
What leverage do you have then as a union? Or can you not tell us?
Well,
keep your cards close to your chest.
Well, we can go on strike. And I think, in 2023 on the West End, we shifted the deal on pay by making a very clear and serious threat that was real, that we would take industrial action if we didn't get a deal that was acceptable. We'd not done that on the West End for a generation, and it shifted the dial. We had an indicative ballot in December of last year about AI. 99.6% of members that we basically surveyed, but did an indicative ballot, it was not a legally binding ballot, 99.6% of members on a 75% turnout said that they would take industrial action over AI. Now, that immediately moved the producers. In the early January this year, they offered us this sort of SAG-AFTRA plus deal. It's still not good enough, but, it's got them in the room at the table. So we can go on strike. It's hard. We can't do like a sectoral, everybody out in TV and film. Bit easier in the West End, bit easier in subsidised theatre maybe. But we also have other kind of bits of leverage that we maybe haven't always very effectively used. The ability to audit productions that haven't paid our members royalties accurately, the ability to make a stink with high-profile members, the ability to take other forms of direct action, instructing members not to sign contracts, instructing members to avoid certain venues, or indeed sort of audio studios or video games and so on. There are ways. And the thing is that we've moved past a real danger zone in the life of the union. And the generation before me, if you like, we're the 12th largest union in the country, which is insane. And that's partially our success, but it's mostly a damning failure of the union movement. And the reason we're there is because we survived as an independent union. Why? The industry can't survive without the structures we've got in place. And they tried very hard to break us in the 90s. We lost our agreements for TV commercials, really, really important. We lost for a period an agreement for commercial touring theatre, which saw terms and conditions in that part of the world tumble. But basically they realised that they couldn't work without us. How else are they going to calculate royalties? How else are they going to get around agents for every single member? How else are they going to set a benchmark that means that their competitors aren't constantly undercutting them on the West End and elsewhere? There is a symbiotic relationship with us and the producers. That's the kind of grubbier end of trades unionism. It's true that it does we do oil the wheels of business. The exchange for that is you have to offer decent terms and conditions. And where the union, I feel, has not been robust enough, not necessarily always the union's fault, but I think that is the correct analysis, over the last 95 years, is in demanding rates of pay that are decent. and minimizing precarity. And that's what the next 5 years, my next kind of General Secretary term, is all about.
I think I see some parallels in working as a trade unionist in deindustrialized industries and working in an industry that faces almost existential threat through AI. Like the very fabric of how a lot of people work, whether it's like you can, who was it? Matthew McConaughey. I saw Matthew McConaughey doing a thing being like, you've just got to accept it. This is happening now. And people are selling their likenesses and their voices. And it's conceivable that studios will attempt to do a thing where they can just type in, make a movie into a thing and then sell it like that. What kind of dangers are we facing as AI in the industry, in the entertainment industry?
I mean, I think first and foremost, the dangers that actors face are no different from the dangers that lots of working people face. They are facing the same danger as somebody working on the checkouts at Tesco's being replaced with an automated checkout. And I think it's really important to always go back to the fact that artistic work is work. Our members are artists, but they're also workers. And their struggles are not unique or whatever. They might feel a bit more glamorous or a bit more interesting. We might be able to shine a light on other people's working lives, but they're common experiences. And what they're fundamentally about is we had an experience in this country and indeed broadly across the West that between the 1920s and the 1970s and 80s, as technology was introduced, people's working day got shorter, their pay got higher, they shared in the profits that created. It's only been since the 1970s, 80s that has inverted and flipped. The more technology you bring in, the poorer you get. The more people want to pay you less. And technology is not the friend of the worker as William Morris or Oscar Wilde or all those sort of very early socialists believed that this was the thing that was going to give workers dignity and shorter weeks and higher pay. That narrative has been completely flipped. So you've got to go back to core principles. Also, you've got to strip away with AI like the marketing bullshit. Like, it's not that good.
Yeah.
It's not that good. These are large language models that will have a limit because the limit is what's put into them. There will always be a role for the most productive of human labor, which is creative labor. And I don't just mean our members' work. That is the thinking that is done by everybody from a doctor to a nurse to somebody controlling a machine, operating human values over whether your automated car hits one old lady or 5 school children. These are things that AI is not capable of doing and never will be capable of doing. So what we've got to do is make sure that that sort of work is more accessible to more people and that sort of work pays better and is less precarious. So it is a very difficult conversation to say to some of our members that, you know, the jingle on local radio to sell windscreens is probably going to be an AI voice in the medium term. That is a very difficult reality of labour displacement. The fact that video games will be consistently reliant on new data being put in for, both through movement and through audio, is a new frontier where our members should be proportionately remunerated, paid ongoing payments for the use of their likeness in franchises and video games made in this country that are worth more than the film industry. There are areas of significant opportunity that AI presents to turn technology to workers' advantage. And not to just believe, there's no such thing as AI, it's just a marketing term by big tech. And breaking it down for where its uses and its advantages are. You know, there are examples, I can think of one in particular, of a production where AI was used to edit a scene after actors had gone home. And key artists were either unwell or unavailable. And the production was in such a place that if you'd brought everybody back and all the cameras, all the rigging, whatever, it probably wouldn't have been released. The fact that it's now been released and it's on, it's on TV means that our members are getting secondary payments and royalties and they're getting paid out for it. That's a great use of AI for the worker. Really good use of AI for the worker. So we don't want to stand in the way of that. What we want to do is limit and regulate its use, make sure that our members' likenesses, images, audio isn't used beyond the particular production on which they're engaged, isn't sold on to some random big tech company, isn't scraped illegitimately without the consent of the producer or the artist. You know, those are the things that you need to be dealing with instead of being scared about this monolith. It's not scary. It's nothing different from what the Luddites faced. And the Luddites ultimately won.
Did they?
Yeah.
That's not the story.
It's not the story that you want to be told, but it is ultimately the story of where this country was in 1950, 1960, 1970.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking about massive oversupply of labour in the 1950s and 60s in every part of the economy, largely as a result of the introduction of new technologies. That is an extraordinary victory for the Luddites. Workplaces were safer, they were more collectively owned, pay, material terms and conditions were improving. The Luddites won. And it might have taken an extra 100 years from when they were actually hacking down machines, but our history as a class, our history as a movement, can't be told through each individual battle because that's exactly what the bosses want us to do.
I mean, yeah, I think it's a nice, hopeful way of looking at it. I think I do have, like, I agree with you that there is this over egging of like how powerful AI is. Like, if you just use ChatGPT or whatever, you realize that it's a sycophant, it's a dummy, it just makes stuff up. And as Matt Goodwin found out recently when he decided to use it to help him write his book, it just makes stuff up. So I get it, and it also can't create. It has to like take and then just rearrange. So there's no creative energy there, and there may be a big bubble that pops at some time, but at the same time, they are kind of like, they're getting into so many different things that I know is not your sector, but in terms of like military and just governments and just the way Elon Musk used Doge as a cover to basically data swipe the American, like, was insane and crazy. But that's me going on a tangent, right? But I find them very unnerving. All of those tech people, I find them very unnerving. I wanted to ask about royalties, right? And how that works with the streamers, because they keep a lot of their numbers close to their chest, don't they? And I don't know, I noticed this is just my pet peeve. I started watching a show on one of these streamers that I used to love when I was a child, and I was like, great, they've got this, let me watch it. I noticed that something was off, like 2-3 episodes. I was like, what's going on here? The sound was different. The music, the theme tune was different. The music was different. And it took me a while to realize it. And I thought, oh, maybe it starts later on. And basically what the streamers had done is they didn't want to pay the royalties for the original songs they used. So they just made generic music and slapped it on and thought I didn't notice. And I thought, I'm not watching this now. It's like, it's ruined it for me. But like, there's a lot of funny business going on with the streaming platforms. Are you trying to like get in and get transparency with them?
I think transparency is, I mean, that's obviously part of the exercise. We want them to be honest, but you have to be, it's so hard to check their homework. There will always be innate suspicion from both sides. When we have to move to a different method of how royalties are calculated. And if you go back to the business model of these streamers, very different to the business model of ITV when it was set up in the 60s. ITV made its money through adverts. You could see how much money came in, you could see how much money came out, you could see how many people watched a program. Nice, easy, simple. ITV's desire was to pay for its product and to turn a profit from advertising. BBC, likewise with the license fee and so on, so on, so on. This is a different model entirely. And the model is not to sell you a production. So if you look at Disney, they make the largest portion of their money from theme park sales. The Lion King musical has made significantly more money worldwide than the Lion King film. Live experience for Disney is its largest asset.
That's so interesting.
It is, isn't it?
I quite like that.
And so what it means is that what they want you to do really is have a Disney Plus in order to sell you the live experiences and to some extent the merchandise and all that other stuff. If you look at Amazon, they want to sell you a delivery service. If you look at Apple, they want to sell you hardware. The only people that have a slightly different model is Netflix. But what Netflix is trying to tell you is a body of intellectual property, not an individual production. They don't give a shit if people watch in very small numbers and they gain another niche market and then watches a set of other things. The reason why they've been so interested in non-English language production elsewhere in Europe, that what they've done is they've come in, they've made these productions and then introduced a domestic audience to a range of largely English language product from around the world. And if you look at even some of their biggest titles, they're not garnering a global audience that would have rivaled a Coronation Street audience in the 1970s, 1980s. So the model that they have is density. They don't aim to make a profit. So sometimes when you look at the production values on some of the streaming stuff, it's incredibly high. But also, how will they ever make their money back on it? They won't. Not on that production, but on the body of the business as a whole. And we've got to respond to that because our traditional mode of royalties is eyeballs watching the screen, or perhaps the level of the budget, which is where we used to do TV commercials and so on and so on. And none of those are very helpful indicators anymore of anything real. Licensing periods is a much more realistic thing. How long do you want this thing on your platform? I don't care how many people watch it. I care that it's available for 5 years, for 4 years, for 3 years, for 20 minutes, for whatever. And then there are other corollaries, so you can adjust that based on the production values, and maybe based on some viewing figures and whatever, or the number of subscribers the service as a whole has. So it's not a perfect model, but it's a much better model of licensing, which is how our agreement with the BBC iPlayer basically works and is the first agreement of that type in the world. The BBC iPlayer, by lots of different measures, is the most successful streaming service in the world. It has a larger market share in this country than all the other streaming services combined. At the time when there's a lot of chatter about the failure of the BBC, we have to be realistic about why people tell you the BBC is a commercial failure when it is not. Because it wants to be a lot of people out there want to asset strip it. So yeah, anyway, so moving the way in which royalties are calculated to a model that reflects the business model of the streamers is a key industrial concern.
Let's talk about the BBC actually, because you've got a campaign, a plan, or whatever to whatever is what I say a lot. To rejuvenate the BBC or fight back against what is happening to the BBC. What is happening to the BBC?
So the same thing that's happening to the BBC is happening to the National Health Service.
Yeah.
And these are arguments that people are much more familiar with. Private companies coming in to do core work, core business, and making a profit off of it. And so if you look at the BBC, we have a BBC agreement that governs productions that are run by the BBC directly. It's essentially only continuing drama or the soaps that uses that. Basically, everything else is made by an independent production company. Sometimes BBC Studios, sometimes, very often, productions which are wholly owned or producers which are wholly owned by the BBC or part owned by the BBC, which then starts to beg the question, where does the profit from that come from? So the argument we're making about the BBC is the same argument the RMT is making about cleaners on railway trains, the same argument that Unison is making about hospital cleaning or janitorial services or housekeeping services or whatever, that they should be in-house. That that the gross inefficiency in the BBC is the profit motive that's been created by an internal market that has proved itself to fail everywhere in our welfare state. And the BBC is part of our welfare state. It's part of a core social infrastructure that we should have. And that's the core of what the union's saying. There are other elements of it as well. The gross disparity in spending and production. The BBC. I'm never great with figures, but I'm sure the figure is that the Midlands, where I'm from, gets 2% of license fee payer. It gets 2% of production expenditure, but yet accounts for over 25% of license fee. So
where is that going? Like into the regional news, into what?
Largely that. So when we complained about the closure of doctors, which some of your viewers might find it a bit funny that we would get very antsy about doctors.
It was the
largest single employer of actors in the country. Like the largest single employer of individual actors in the country. It was a bedrock of how people pay their bills. And what the BBC did is when they got rid of it, it was made in Birmingham. They said, we said, well, this is outrageous. And they said, yeah, but chill out. We're bringing in MasterChef. And I mean, some of our 50,000 members will be decent cooks, but I mean, it's not going to replace the work on doctors. It's reality TV. It's made by an independent production company, not by the BBC. And the production scale of it, not just our members, but technical staffs and so on, is significantly smaller. So where has the money gone? Well, it's gone into an independent producer making increasingly factual or low-cost content. That is the BBC not living up to its role as a kind of driver of creative content, or up to its role of being at the anchor of the creative workforce. Like, the BBC does have a role as part of the welfare state to keep actors employed and keep them in the business. And it's, at the minute, that part of its mission is being entirely removed. So one of the things we want to see in the new charter is a workforce covenant that says that when the BBC makes programming decisions about River City in Scotland or doctors in Birmingham, they say, what is the overall impact on the workforce, which the industry is dependent on? And we will assess that impact as part of the decision, not just looking at viewing behavior alone as the determinant of what they do with creative content, because that is a grave, grave, grave error. And it doesn't serve audiences well either.
No. The BBC is well, it's not a tough one because I think it's like non-negotiable. I think everyone loves the BBC, but like there's two ways in which it is getting attacked. And one is like they're using the kind of politicization of news to attack everything about the BBC. And then the second one is like the TV license feels annoying, basically, and no one likes dealing with it. And so do you think that is a model of funding that is sustainable?
Yes.
And how will it, how do you keep the consent on board and protect it from attacks?
So the average British household spends over £400 a year on television services.
Well, this is what's crazy, actually. It's because when I deep it, right, I'm like, I have to swap out my things because it gets a bit ridiculous. And I'm paying like 50 quid a month and I find, right, okay, I'm not watching anything on fucking Disney this month. Mm-hmm. I'm going to watch something on that. Mm-hmm. It is a bit ridiculous. At this point, we're basically getting... But anyway, yeah, you were saying.
But that's the point. You know, so if the average British household is spending over 400 quid, best part 500 quid on TV services, including the license fee is not the problem here. The problem here is the fracturing of the television market, and that has enormous social consequences. One of the most annoying thing that Keir Starmer has done, from the perspective of my industry, maybe not the most morally egregious, but one of the most annoying things that he's done, is when the Stephen Graham production, The Adolescents, came out last year, whenever it was. It was every school child, this should be shown in schools. Kids in schools know this story. They're living this. I mean, as you watch the program, like, they don't need to be shown it. Parents need to be shown it. They need to be shown it on a universal, free of point of view service to their home at 9 p.m, not Netflix, which some of them will not be able to afford to pay for, and some of them will simply not be choosing to pay for at that particular time because they can't afford all those packages. Why is there not an obligation on the Premier League and on certain national sporting events to show to ensure that it is shown on the BBC? Part of the social contract about the license fee has to be about what it pays for. And what do people in Britain love? They love sport, they love drama, they love comedy. And those three things are increasingly becoming fractured, and they're paying for them elsewhere. So how do we do that? How do we oblige those streamers who use the BBC's infrastructure, its social infrastructure and its physical infrastructure, to make their content here? That's fine, but there's got to be an exchange here. And that is part of it. So I think the social contract of the license fee is secured by saying it gives you more guarantees about what you're going to get as a minimum service from television in the UK. At the minute, you pay your license fee to pay for the BBC, and you might not be able to watch the football match you want to watch. You might not be able to see, really, and we might not be able to communicate important social messages to each other. That is where the social contract bit needs to break down. There also needs to be a very honest conversation about the profit motive inside the BBC. The license fee will go further if there were less private companies profiting off of the BBC. The license fee would not need to rise by as much as it's currently being slated if there was more internal production. The BBC is constantly told to be more like the streamers. What do the streamers never do? Sell their intellectual property. Never. Yet the BBC, if you're very often able to watch more episodes of Keeping Up Appearances or, Hello or whatever on a streaming platform that I've never heard of than you are on the iPlayer itself. Why is that being permitted?
Yeah.
The BBC's unrivaled bank of intellectual property is being sold as they've got to be more commercial, they've got to sell it. Commercial streamers do not sell their content to other providers. It's being asset stripped in front of our eyes. And those sorts of things, again, keep the license fee sustainable.
That is like that. There's a show that's on the BBC now, and I want to say it's Amandaland, I can't remember. But the current season is playing on the BBC, and then old seasons are playing on Netflix. So people are like, oh, Amandaland is on, and then go to fucking Netflix to watch the rest of it. And I know some people argue, I think like this is a kind of a central point of like, say, Gary Stevenson's argument, is that like the private sector is just like outfoxing the public sector. When I actually think that no, there are just people within the public sector who are corrupt and are allowing it to happen and like it. Like people who are the fact that like the BBC board is like appointed politically. So you end up having 15 years of Tory appointers, and you have the same thing in like the NHS. We have people on the board who have connections to private healthcare, and it's like it's not about these people in the NHS or these people in the civil service who are like not as smart. They are smart. It's the fact that they are just corrupt. I think.
Well,
I don't know. Can you say corrupt without getting sued? But
well, they are very often motivated by things beyond the public good. And that's not even it's not even necessarily a conscious choice on their part. That is what they're instinctively, their class interest, their material interest tells them to do. And the BBC is a shining example of that. I mean, one of the most interesting... So as part of the government consultation, I have had various meetings where I'm being consulted on what my views are, what the union's views are. And I was asked in a slightly needling way, well, you know, how do you feel about BBC top talent wages having to be published? And of course, you know, many of those people are our members and they earn a lot of money and they deserve to earn a lot of money. That is their current market value. Their market value tomorrow may be nothing. They may, you know, you can earn sometimes in our industry £250,000 for 10 years and then not earn for the next 30. You know, that's the nature of it. I'm very relaxed about those figures being published, but I would much rather they publish the pay gap between them and the security guard who meets you at the door. I would be much happier if the day players rate on a BBC production was published alongside the top earners rates. I'd be much happier if independent productions were brought within the scope of that. So I know, for instance, that a guy who runs a major independent production company used to earn, you know, six figures when he worked at the BBC. Now he goes off and works for a major independent production company. I don't know what he earns. But yet his principal titles are all on the BBC. I presume he's earning more money than he did at the BBC. That would only be natural. But I don't get to know anymore. But I'm still paying his wages through my license fee. We talk about transparency when it comes to the streamers. Well, hang on a minute. This internal market of the BBC is increasingly opaque. And as you say, it's these people who aren't necessarily bad people. They're not necessarily, but they are brought in for their corporate expertise. They don't bring in corporate expertise. They bring in corporate instinct. And the instinct is the loyalty to their career, to their independent production companies, and to maximizing money for their class. It's not conscious. It's just that is who they are. If you bring in public servants into the BBC, and you see it, you know, how many nurses, how many doctors, how many actors? I mean, so many of our members, they don't do gambling adverts because they find them unethical and distasteful, even though it can be offered a lot of money for them. They do worthy political theatre because they think it's important for society. They choose those wages in the same way as a carer chooses low wages often, or a nurse chooses low wages, or a doctor. Or indeed, you know, in some instances, a dustbin man or a dinner lady or teachers. Bringing people in where that's their instinct and that's their motivation would completely change the BBC and improve its financial viability.
Let's talk about barrier for entry, right? Because we are increasingly, I think it's increasingly felt by a lot of my friends who are like working class performers or actors, that there is an increasing barrier for entry for people from working class backgrounds and an increasing dominance of people who are just very wealthy. And it's becoming a almost hobby for the wealthy, acting. How can we reverse that?
People need to be paid better is the core of it. The bosses benefit from a flexible, precarious freelance workforce that they can call up tomorrow and say, I need you in, you know, Hungary to shoot this TV commercial in 12 hours. They need to be able to pay for people's resting time while they're waiting for that phone call. Whether it's on the West End or whether it's in TV and film, they have to be prepared to pay for the periods where people are out of work. One of the reasons why the industry's got harder is it's not just government policy or whatever. It's because the union created a system in the 1960s where a lot of members, they earned a lot of money on royalties. So even when you were resting, you were receiving money. You had 3-4 channels, there were an increasing number of repeats. Your wages when you weren't working were as high, if not higher, than points where you actually were working and earning your wages. As the market for TV has massively dissipated, and as the industry has got, there's more work. There's less work. That has become harder. There are things that we need to talk about in society, but I think as a trade union, we need to be talking more about the industrial ways in which we can fix it, by getting our members paid more when they're in work, so they can afford to be out of work for the periods of time that the industry demands.
Yeah, I know so many people who do, say, freelance work, and then when they get an acting job, they're taking a massive pay cut. So Ireland, I saw, did this thing where they are going to be supporting artists, and I believe France has a similar kind of like support network for artists. What is the chances of that kind of thing happening in the UK?
In the UK, I think there's potential. I think there's potential in Wales. I think there's potential in Scotland. In England, the potential is zero.
Okay.
We have to acknowledge we did used to have such a system in this country, which was not targeted at the arts. And indeed, the French system isn't specifically targeted at the arts. It is the social security system in this country was such that you could be unemployed, claim your social security, and continue to work. Now we're in a position where our members, because of the minimum income floor that's applied to universal credit, many of our members become ineligible and are treated very differently to a low-paid worker who's come out of a permanent job into a period of unemployment. Because what they say is, you were a freelancer earning so little that basically you weren't a viable business. And so consequently, this is going to bring down your benefits. And when our members' wages go up and down and up and down and up and down, it means essentially the new social security system is inaccessible to them. But in Ireland, which I think is the most interesting thing, that is targeted at the creative industries, it is about saying that there is a minimum income floor that people have to earn in this industry, and the state shoulders some of the responsibility for making sure that they're still there. Is that right? In Wales, actually, there's been a trial of almost an identical system for care leavers, which has proved to be phenomenally successful for people leaving care who've been given a guaranteed income for a period of time. And that means that they, and the social and economic benefits of those people, and indeed you can start extrapolating the knock-on benefits to where they spend their money and so on, is very, very clear. The question is, how much do we want to, as a society, rely on government whilst companies make large profits? It's one thing if the government is checking profit. It's one thing if the government is saying to the video games industry, if you're going to be in receipt of tax credits, then you need to operate on a trade union collective agreement. Or when Netflix or whoever says we haven't got the skills, particularly technical skills, well, wait a minute, you're a multi-billion-dollar international company. Why are you looking to the British state to fund this thing? Like, the state has to be involved in it and the coordination of it. But how are we checking profits? Now, if we get to that point, we could just simply make the social security system more humane for every working person. That would help our members significantly, particularly for the self-employed, but others who are excluded from the workforce, disabled artists, disabled workers, are the most screamingly obvious example. But giving people, I think there is a role to look at, particularly in Scotland and in Wales, where Wales has trialled such a scheme. Scotland's relatively friendly to such a scheme. I think there's potential there. They're much smaller industries where the state is trying to bring in more outward investment. And if you're not having the profits made there, then the government should really be sustaining a creative workforce there. In England, the political temperature on it is beyond cool. It's freezing. They're just not interested in doing it. Therefore, I think the more direct answer is, what are you doing to check the large profits of these streaming services, big tech and so on, and making sure that is going back into the workforce, not only their development, but paying their gas bill.
Yeah. I wrote that speech a couple of years ago at BAFTA. I think it was BAFTA by Samantha Morton. And one thing that stuck out with me that I always think about is she said that the British film industry is more like a service industry for the American film industry. That there's basically not a British film industry anymore, which I found quite interesting because I agree. We spoke about the BBC, but a lot of things that are British coded are American productions, like Bridgerton, essentially, things like that. And it got me thinking about countries that are very close to big soft powerhouses, like, for example, South Korea in its proximity to Japan, and Canada in its proximity to America, have lots of laws about who's allowed to take certain roles on TV, or who's allowed to present certain shows, or in the way that they promote their own like cultural output. Do you think there's space for that kind of thing in the UK?
The guarantor of British content has always been the BBC. And the BBC is under threat in a way that it's never been before. And I think there's a great desire to talk about some of the high end, great classic, whether they be dramas or whatever. But if we look at children's TV content, which is a really important source of work for members, but also a real social value, the Americanization of children's content since I was a child in this country, basically the BBC producing none at all of their own, and the intellectual property of British children's content being owned elsewhere. That is I think in some areas of the industry, comedy probably as well, continuing drama as well, which is an important art form, but also an important source of work for members. Yeah, I think there is a role for an increased kind of quota approach. There is a real problem because of the British government's shift from subsidy to tax credit. It's true in theatre, but it's obviously more true in TV and film. 80% of British production has American money in it. 80%. And a really good example of how egregious this is, if you look at Wallace and Gromit, BBC, Aardman, independent British production company, great role for them doing something different outside of the kind of formal public sector. BBC, state broadcaster, facilitating that work, providing the platform. Now, it's also co-produced by Apple, who will presumably be taking, I say presumably be taking a cut from every Wallace and Gromit mug that's sold, from all the stuff that generates the extra cash at the end of it. That intellectual property, that profit is being skimmed off and going to the United States. If you have a system of subsidy rather than tax credit, that massively disincentivizes Americans coming in and involving themselves in that way in the British industry. However, there is a role, Barbie, large portions of Barbie was filmed over here. Star Wars is on our collective agreements, not on American collective agreements. Indiana Jones is on our collective agreements, not American collective agreements. Part of Barbie was. These are Bridgerton, Sex Education, Wednesday. These are all productions made here on our collective agreements, on our terms, using lots of jobbing British actors. That is, do we want to discourage that? No, I think there is a role to attract inward investment. I think there's a role for that kind of work. I don't think that diminishes anything. It helps our members keep money in their pockets. Where we need to look seriously is protecting, I dislike this term because it feels slightly tasteless, but it is the term that's used, Indigenous content, which is work that's about the place that you're in. And there's something about British content, but let's talk about British children's content and the values and kind of world life lessons we want young children in particular to be absorbing, but also local content. American production companies are very, very, very rarely going to invest in the level that's needed to tell stories like Biker Grove or stories, about the Midlands, or invest in something like River City or Doctors to make them more fit for the modern world. Because consumption habits, audience habits change. We're not opposed to things being presented in a different way or consumed in a different way, or indeed reduced and shifted about. But one of the big reasons why soaps are under threat is not because audiences are dropping off. It's because they're the sorts of audiences that outward investment isn't interested in and basically can't be privatized.
That's crazy. Yeah, I think that so much of what's missing in the industry now is like all these films that I loved about England, Britain, kind of, I'm thinking Ken Loach, I'm thinking Mike Leigh, even Danny Boyle, really, like Trainspotting and things like that. Like, it doesn't seem to be happening as much these days. Obviously, we've shifted towards a kind of selling ourselves to America in a specific way. That means posh people, essentially. But yeah, I don't know. But do you know what? You've convinced me that we're in good hands, and that the BBC is something like I get annoyed even at like left wing people because I get it that like the BBC can be very annoying, but they start attacking the BBC for things, and you're kind of like, I like it. I like it. And like Amazon is not going to do fucking Southwest England radio. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. And when you sit there, what was I went to a meeting in Parliament a couple of months ago now about charter renewal with MPs, and they're all broadly MPs of goodwill who want to do the right thing for us and our members and the country. And they're like, well, the BBC's obviously it's got to change. Obviously it's really obviously it's fair. There's this narrative of failure that you're starting from, even from its supporters. And you're like, what is the narrative of it? Young people don't watch it. Young people go out. Young people have always gone out. It's still 2/3 of people in the 16 to 20-odd age bracket, whatever the lowest age bracket is, are consuming 8 hours or more of BBC content a week. There is no other entertainment service, whether that be the BBC News website.
16 to what?
I think it's 16 to 25. I think that's
really?
the sort of first
they're
group.
watching like 8 hours of BBC a week.
And they're like, yeah, but it's 90-odd% when it's pensioners. Yes, because pensioners are more likely to be at home.
But they're sitting out there watching fucking Bargain Hunt. That's what they do.
Exactly. There has always been a tendency of younger people to consume less of this content. But it's pointed out as well, they're losing younger audiences. Are they? Actually, the BBC, it created the iPlayer before streaming existed. It retains a larger market share than all the streamers put together. How is that a failure? Okay, the license fee isn't high enough to sustain the model that the BBC has. But what is the model that isn't being sustained? I would argue it's a model where independent productions, private companies skim profit off the top. Not a model that's about public duty and subsidy and excellence and art alongside popular culture and everything that's got a decent kind of British bent. It's not. That's not, if you look at the BBC and what they produce and what they make and how they make it, that's not what it is. So to defend the BBC as it is to defend a deeply fractured, privatised husk of what the BBC was and could be. To defend the BBC as to what I understand it is as an arm of the welfare state. Keir Starmer was elected with a manifesto promising the largest wave of insourcing in a generation. Well, I want to see it at the BBC as much as I want to see it in the health service.
We haven't got much time left, but I do want to ask you about you mentioned Keir Starmer. Do you miss being in Labour politics? Do you miss being a Labour councillor? For those who don't know, you're a Labour councillor.
I was a Labour councillor for 8 years, which if I live to the age of 80, that's 10% of my life, and it's 10% of my life which I won't get back.
Do you know that the internet says that you were like the only pro-Corbyn Labour councillor in Southwark, apparently?
I mean, that is true. That is true. Out of 40, whatever it was of us, I was the only one who voted for him. The first time around, to be fair, there were more who supported him in the sort of post-chicken coup 2016 malarkey, but I was the only one in 2015.
It's interesting. What do you do you miss being a councillor? I feel like internal Labour politics is one of the most toxic places to be in the country.
The best thing about being a Labour councillor was giving it up. And I think when look, I'm a relatively calm person and I'm relatively competent at my job. And I find myself, whether it be, or I used to find myself representing people in disciplinaries or, doing whatever, faced with very distressed members in very distressed situations. And indeed, as a counsellor, trying to do bits of casework, really grim housing conditions, very often the private sector, but also in council housing in Southwark. I could deal with all of that. But the idea of sitting in another Labour group meeting with the nasty, hyper-personalised immaturity of not every council, certainly not every council, but a large portion of them, who are intellectually bereft, devoid of principles, I find it anxiety-inducing. And leaving it, I think, as we were saying at the beginning, what's so good about trades unionism and so moral about it is that it's rooted in a material reality, and it's rooted in people realising their power, not artificially creating power from somewhere else. And being a councillor is about artificially collecting power from your stakeholders and your clever arguments and your, whether you can twist the arm of this cabinet member or the leader of the council to do X, Y, and Z. And there were things that I did that I was proud of. There were things that the Labour Party in Southwark did, which they are proud of and should be proud of. Am I proud of the internal culture of the Labour Party post 2016? I mean, there was like a absolute
It's
handbrake
snapped
turn
a lot
on
of
it.
people's brains, yeah.
Absolutely. And what we all now know, of course, is all the things the left were accused of in the Labour Party is just it was the secret sort of wet dream of the Starmerites who now control the party, because the level of expulsion, the narrowing of the intellectual debates of the party, they have raised the broad church and built a very slim chapel. I mean, that is, really grim. And actually, one of the things about the rise of the Greens that I think is underreported, and I'm still a member of the Labour Party. I shan't be voting Green, but one of the things about the Greens is that their pluralism and their democratic structures are actually part of their success, their current success. The fact that you can join and have a say and be heard, but equally the policy doesn't change immediately overnight with a new group of people. Like, there's a sort of maturity and an intellectual depth to how it's run that is just the Labour Party did used to have that. I think under Ed Miliband it had that. But from 2016 onwards, it collapsed in and of itself, and yeah.
Well, I do think that a lot of the personal nature of what happened in the Labour Party post 2016 was the fact that lots of people's livelihoods, you could call it grift, you could call it whatever, became under threat, and I think like that's kind of linked to some of the fight you're going to have or are having with, say, the BBC, or people are having with the NHS, where like a lot of people are making a lot of money and a lot of career connections through, like I've heard, I don't know what Southwark was like, but like Lambeth, I know Wandsworth, like a lot of people on these councils are connected to like housing developers who want luxury apartments built in these like trendy neighborhoods, and therefore the council houses get neglected, the social housing gets neglected, and then the people I know who are in the weeds of these councils, like I know people in Haringey, I know people in Wandsworth, whatever, who are like, they are every day under attack from these people because they're trying to get like social housing conditions built. They're trying to get council houses built, and it just becomes really personal.
It does, and it significantly affects your credibility when you're trying to. I mean, Aylesbury Estate was was the majority of my ward, which was at that point the largest regeneration in Western Europe, and 60% of the people in my ward lived on one estate, which was riddled with problems. I mean, whether it be asbestos, the heating system hadn't worked effectively since the late 1970s. I think in my 8 years of being a councillor, I think it was 1 or 2 Christmas days where everybody had heating. It doesn't work, and the people who live on the estate don't want to be there. But yet, the credibility of the council, when we said, look, this is, and we genuinely did get to a point where we were committed to, I believe are still committed to, more social housing in Walworth, which is the community, by the end of the regeneration than there was in 1970, making sure that the sizing of social housing was maintained, the Parker Morris plus 10%, which was the sort of standard size of a council house instead of boxing people in, building more social bedrooms, with an awful lot of one-bedroom studio flat type setups, which weren't, that isn't the housing need in Southwark. These are all really good things, but they become really difficult to talk about with any degree of credibility when the now leader of Southwark Council was a lobbyist for developers. The leader of the Southwark Council, when I was a councillor for the majority of the time when I was a councillor, now in the House of Lords, perfectly decent man. I get on with him on a personal level perfectly well, but then immediately went off to go and work for massive private housing developers who had, had relationships with as the leader of the council. And people scream this at you in a meeting, and you're like, yes, but can you look at the square footage of these houses? It's really good. It doesn't work. And that is, as you say, quite sad. What I think there is a degree of hope. I mean, you've probably guessed, I dislike a sort of, I don't want to be the no union. I don't want to be the sort of negative person. I think you go a bit crackers if you do that. I do think the Labour Party in government has kind of grown into itself a little bit. We've been having some conversations recently about personality rights for our members, where I genuinely think that the voice of the creative industries is being treated with a level of seriousness that the tech industry was being treated with alone in 2024 when they were first elected. There's been a really good about turn on that kind of stuff. But it becomes very hard in the same way as me and my little local council level to talk about regeneration when there's a fundamental level of mistrust. They can't talk about an Employment Rights Bill, Employment Rights Act being really good because nobody quite believes it. They can't talk about the stuff they're doing on energy, which is pretty good, but they can't talk about it in positive because nobody quite believes it. there is a real need to steal one of Keir Starmer's favourite phrases for a sort of reset. And there has to be that acknowledgement, I think, at the heart of it all, that the social contract is really broken. That if, people won't mind paying more taxes if they think that it will improve their life. They do mind paying more taxes if they think it's to service national debt. Like that, we used to pay more money and get more services. And now our experience at work is we work more for less pay and we pay more tax for less services. That social contract has to be upended. And can the Labour Party move fast enough to do that when it's now basically it's 2 years in, it's got 3 years to go tops? I mean, like that is a real, you're going to have to perform a magic trick to do that. But I do think they are getting a lot more serious about it. And hopefully the local elections will be the wake-up call that we want, not a reform wave. I don't think that's going to, I think there will be a massive reform set of victories, but I do think the Greens are going to do very well. It's inevitable the Labour Party is going to do terribly or catastrophically. Hopefully that is the wake-up call, post-Morgan McSweeney, that the Labour Party needs to change its internal culture, change its economic policy, change its approach to working people, change its approach to the environment, and just sort of get a bit serious about fighting the fash and paying your gas bill.
Yeah, I just hope that I'm not convinced that the people believe what you said. Like the people involved are so detached from reality. And you mentioned Morgan McSweeney. I hope he's at home watching Bargain Hunt now.
Or a high-quality costume drama.
Oh, yeah, exactly. You could be watching.
Yeah.
You could be watching.
He better be watching
Morgan.
some unionised performers. That's what I want.
I mean, yeah. So we'll see. Okay, Paul. It's been lovely chatting to you. But what I want to know now is, what is something that you've had enough of?
Artificial intelligence.
You've had enough of it.
Yeah. And I'm sick of people talking about it. I'm sick of people thinking it's any good. I'm sick of people thinking it's going to rip the heart out of everything that's good. I'm sick of people thinking that there is no way of dealing with it. It is just another front. Nothing ever changes. These are battles we have to fight again and again. It's winnable. It's absolutely winnable. And people's obsession with big tech's marketing term and how it's, this inevitable, cutthroat thing for all of us. We need to be carrying the corner. I'm sick of it.
Well, I think that they have clocked that we're realizing it's a bit of a bubble, and they've switched it now to AGI.
Yeah.
It's the new thing that's coming, and
Add a new letter.
It's AGI now. That's going to be the one. So you don't think we should be scared of Skynet? You don't think we're going to live a Matrix future?
No, I don't. No, I think it's daft. And I think that, I think the Workers United will never be defeated. I think when we realise that and when we live that, it doesn't matter if it's AI or Elon Musk or the Rockefellers or the great Victorian cotton mill owners or whoever. Like these are things which we have taken on in the past and we have won as a movement, and we're going to do it again with AI and whatever comes after it. It's not a big deal. All we just need is the same things as we needed for hundreds of years.
Okay, I believe you. What is something that you can't get enough of?
Can't get enough of. This one I find harder.
A lot of people do, A lot of people do. I think it's like I think I can diagnose the problems, but I can't get enough of.
Well, it's difficult because you either want to say something very serious and worthy, don't you, or say something really frivolous and try and be funny and not. But you know what I can't? I tell you what I can't get enough of is pubs.
Oh yeah,
and that allows me. I love a pub. I love a decent pub. I love going to the pub on my own. I love going to the pub with my dog. I love going to the pub with my friends. I love a pub with live entertainment. Yeah. I love a pub with a quiz. I love a pub with a drag act on. I think they are just such uniquely British spaces where, nobody looks down on that working class culture of the pub. And it is working class culture of the pub. It is a place in which people gather and connect and, put the world to rights. And they are such joyful, glorious places. I cannot get enough of pubs.
They're struggling.
They are struggling, and they're a major source of work for a lot of our members. There's a lot of talk, quite rightly, about theatre venues being under threat and the impact.
Oh, the pub theatres.
But it's like, let's talk about pubs and clubs being under threat. Let's talk about these massive spaces. Bethnal Green Working Men's Club, a really, really, really important space for our members, a factory of work, really. But do you know what? We've been running a campaign for 2 years. And it looks that this predominantly LGBTQ plus cabaret venue is going to be saved. Tower Hamlets Council, we're looking at you. There does need to be that kind of that sort of that intervention in those sorts of spaces. And I think it's really important that children should learn. I think children from every class background should learn about Shakespeare. Should learn about all. I think it is important. People should be exposed to opera. I think that kids in working class communities, some of the amazing stuff that our members at the ENO do in the East End, particularly around Bethnal Green, introducing young working class kids from diverse backgrounds to the idea that they can be opera singers is really important. But I don't think we just think that is the be all and end all of culture. I think that being able to be a pub singer, where some of the most talented singers I've ever met are our variety singers who do great tribute acts, who do a great drag act, who have their own comedy act and are never massively famous, but they make a solid living out of it. Those venues, those pubs, save them. Can't get enough of them.
I mean, Jane McDonald has done well out of it. Do you know what I mean?
Comrade Jane McDonald. Comrade Jane McDonald. She is a very supportive member, and she is a great advocate. I mean.
And in a world where like these third spaces, these public spaces are getting like more and more encroached on, I agree with you, pubs are a good place. And with that, we'll say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thanks.
Time.
Bye. Cut.